Good morning and good afternoon to you wherever you may be as you tune in today. And thank you for joining us. For those who have joined us for the first time, this webinar series is focused on HR and workplace topics with a lens of talent, workplace culture, and learning and development. I'm Sonia Sapaban, CEO of OurOffice, where we help organizations with a full suite of products and services for workplace culture and L&D. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Michelle Chass, Global Director of Learning and Talent Development at Food for the Hungry. Thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. And welcome to you. Before we get into the meat of this conversation, let's make sure you're familiar with some logistics. I think we all are fairly familiar with these things. We use the Zoom webinar tool, which many of you have used before. This is an interactive webinar, so please use the chat function to provide your comments and any questions you may have. We have our colleagues at our office, especially Anushka Sarif, who will be moderating the questions in real time and also chiming in as needed. So thanks in advance to Anushka. We will answer as many questions as we can throughout and afterwards if needed, as long as you provide your email address in the chat when you ask your question. Also, please note this session is being recorded and will be available after the webinar on the events page at ouroffice.io/events. All right, last but not least, I want to share that this webinar is approved for both SHRM and HRCI recertification credits, and we will share the activity codes later on. So with that, Michelle, it's really great to have you here. To begin, I'm sure our audience would love to know you a little bit better. Can you please spend a minute or two just introducing yourself, your current role, as well as your background and connection to this topic, and personal experiences that have maybe some significant ones that have brought you to this moment in your life and your career, please.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Sonia. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Michelle Chassie, and as you said, I serve in learning and development and the global director at Food for the Hungry, and I've been serving at Food for the Hungry now for about 9 years. Prior to that, I've had an opportunity to work in multiple sectors from healthcare to education, and now in the not-for-profit space. And so L&D has always just been a passion for me, and it's where my career has led me. I started working in human resources and found my way to the L&D sector specifically because of my love of learning and helping others learn and develop. And so whether they're at the organization we're working at or they continue on, grow and flourish in their roles. And so that's a little bit about me. I think this topic is really interesting because, as you know, things have changed so much in the last 4 years and how we learn and what we're learning. And I think, like many other people, I also have a short attention span. And so how do we stay engaged with the learning opportunities that are provided, but also that we seek out? And how do we make sure that we're learning the right things that we need as personal individuals, but then also how are we helping our team members learn and develop globally so the organization performs at the level it needs to?
Yeah, 100%. And so that's everything that we're going to talk about. So thank you for sharing that background and how you got there. I want to introduce the topic a bit to just make sure we're all level set because people, have just different backgrounds. Learning and development has always been an important HR function, right? And there's typically a lot of investment in it. In fact, I'd like to show a little image of just the amount of investment in there. This is from a SHRM study, which shows that about a third of all organizations spend anywhere from $500 to $1,000 per employee per year in L&D. Another third approximately spend between $1,000 to $3,000. And, again, another third spend over $3,000. That's per employee per year. So there is a significant investment. Clearly, there's a correlation with the size of the organization and type of work that people do. But you can see even for a small organization, I was thinking for about like 500 people, right? L&D is a significant budget line item at about close to like $250,000 at the lowest level, right, annually. And of course, it's budgets are tight these days. I mean, I'm sure, Michelle, I mean, do you have any thoughts on the spend? Does it kind of surprise you, or is this kind of your consistent with your experience, your understanding of the space?
I think it does go, with all the resources that we provide through learning, like the learning management systems, through personnel. I think it does, it resonates with me. I think it's pretty familiar.
Yeah, no, it's a key budget line item, right? And of course, part of the issue here is this slide. It's the forgetting curve, right? Because we do all of this training, all of this learning and development. This is a curve that a German psychologist actually came up with in 1885, and it's held true. A lot of organizations and HR professionals are familiar with this. It shows that we forget kind of exponentially, right? Meaning that we forget about 80% of everything that we've learned in the first week. Now, this is in absence of any reinforcement, of course. And within 30 days, we forget about 90% of it. So even you think of that, that's pretty dramatic, right? And L&D effectiveness is an even bigger issue, I think, these days, because many organizations are dealing with training a remote or a hybrid workplace, and just people's changing relationship to their work after the pandemic has made it a little bit harder. And to top it all, of course, you have new technologies like generative AI and all these things that mean a lot of reskilling and cross-training, possibly for many organizations. All of this just in a way of introduction to say that talking about L&D is more important than ever, we think. And in fact, we have a series of L&D topics we will be introducing over the rest of this year in our webinars and roundtable discussions. But to start, Michelle, again, to just level set everyone, I want to ask you to talk a little bit about learning personas and the shift in our relationship to work after the pandemic. You and I talked a little bit about that and the effect that all of this has on L&D design, because we're going to focus on L&D design first, and then talk about ways to measure it, and then of course look to the future a little bit, just to give a sense of kind of the topics, the three key topics. But the first one is really the design of the programs and what drives it, right? So from your perspective, how do you define the learning personas, just to start there?
Yeah, I think one of the things we really rely on is understanding who we're designing our learning paths for, or our content. And so I think that's where the learning personas come in. And so we're looking at really understanding who our clients are. What are their unique characteristics? What do they need to know? What are their roles, and what does their work environment look like? Because what works for one environment is not going to work in another context. And so the more specific we can get with those learning personas, and also identifying the multiple learning personas in our organization, we're able to leverage our content design better, because we know it's not one size fits all. Something that's going to need to be used in a customer service department is going to look different than what's going to be for knowledge workers. And so how they access the learning, how they develop and comprehend with it and actually apply it is going to be different. And so we need to look at all of those pieces in these personas to do it. And I think it's something we have to actively do. We can't just have one learning persona and develop it for years on end, because of the changing world and because people's environments and what they need changes.
Yeah, I remember when we first, started doing some training around diversity, equity, and inclusion, back when I had a hat. One of the hats I wore was leading that. And we did a lot of research and everything, and we picked a great provider that we thought could do a great job. And we had everything from techs on the floor, to PhDs, right? And everything in between. And we proudly provided this training to everybody. We were glad that we were training everyone. And then there was really a very surprising reaction, because those that were on the floor everybody had some problem with it. There was a small number of people who thought it was great. But frankly, when we looked at it, there was all these different feedback. And at the end of the day, it seemed that, we just hadn't designed it. We weren't professionals. We're kind of just making it up as we went, frankly, a little bit, and getting educated, of course, by providers. We did some research and talked to different providers. But it turned out that that training wasn't really right for anybody, but a very small number of people. And so to your point, now when we work, with our partners and customers, we always say, one size doesn't fit all. We really have to understand, what are the learning objectives, right? But who are you delivering them to? And maybe designing a little bit different types of formats, different types of, depth, language, for, at what level do you want to have the content, and all of that. So, now that we've talked about personas, the importance of that, what about this, macro trend, right? I loved when you were talking about just what you call the shift in people's relationship with work, and the importance of growing the whole person more than ever. What do you mean by that?
I think, what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing is that people's work doesn't just happen 9 to 5. And so as we become more tech-centered, and we have been in the last, 10, 15 years, but as we're more attached to our cell phones, how we do our work and where we do our work varies. I joined a call from a bus yesterday at 7 a.m. on my commute in. And so how do you design work and the work atmosphere to help that and enable that learning? And so it doesn't look the same anymore. It used to look like, our parents' generation would go in and sit in their office and be there 9 to 5 and come home. And then they'd be completely off. And now we're getting pinged at different hours, or we might work a couple hours on a Saturday. But there's a lot of beautiful flexibility with that. And so as we're designing the learning, we want to look at that holistic person. We want to look at, how do we provide opportunities to invest in people for their holistic well-being? Are we investing in what they need to learn, not just what the organization wants as well?
So how does that, do you think that's mostly because of the pandemic, or is it also just a changing workforce, as we have more Gen Z, especially in the workforce? I mean, what are the key factors? Because, different companies have and organizations have different, workforce profiles, right? Some organizations may say, we have a pretty stable organization in terms of the workforce. Our demographics haven't changed that much. Why should we change, or at least revisit, some of the ways that we're doing our L&D? So just taking it down to a little bit more like maybe actionable kind of thoughts there. Can you offer anything in terms of maybe example from what you are doing in your own role, in terms of revisiting, and what are some key maybe levers or anything that you've thought about as you think about, your L&D program design as a whole?
I think some of it, does have to do with the pandemic. I think that gave us a fast forward on how we address learning and development. But I think it was just a changing workforce as well. I think we come more holistic to the job. I mean, I oftentimes have conversations with my supervisor about not just what's going on in the work world, but what's going on in my personal life. And, we combine those two, which is unusual. And so as we're doing that, it's how do we train our supervisors to make that safe space to check in on people holistically in one-on-ones? As we look at performance management as a whole, and that includes everything from your one-on-ones to your career development conversations to your performance management process. Are we looking at people holistically and having the conversations and the check-ins on how are you? Because it's also been proven that we know when people are at their best and feel supported, they're going to show up better at work. They're going to be more productive. And so when we can check in on both of those areas, it helps the organization overall, especially when we can do it from a place of authenticity.
It makes me think of, again, a personal experience when I was a young engineer and I was given an opportunity to go through a training program to be ready for the next level. There was a certification, we were At that time, I worked at a large company, which was a government contractor. And so certain things needed, certain certifications. And this was a longer training program. It was over, it included some weekends, which ordinarily I would have been just fine with. And it was a very coveted, kind of opportunity because it cost the company, a little bit. And so young engineers at my level were always looking for those kind of opportunities. So it was a tap on the shoulder, and it was regarded as being a pretty sought after, opportunity. It turns out I was also a single mother, and at that time I coincided one of the weekends. I coincided with one of my son's, Boy Scout camping trips. I was a den mother, so I went on these camping trips, and at that time I remember how difficult it was for me to think through that and to bring myself to tell my supervisor. And the supervisor's reaction at the time, and bless his heart, I mean, he was a very good supervisor normally, but it's just the times, right? He said, are you sure you want to, like, there's no other way. You can't leave the child or, with someone else, or ask, somebody else to go in your stead on this camping trip. And to me, I had really thought about it, and it was a definite no. I can't do that. And so he said, this could be career limiting. I remember that conversation where he kind of ended it with that. And I said to him, I said, well, I have so much regard for you. I'm sure that the way you communicate this up the chain, it's going to be just fine. And it turns out actually a couple of years later, another opportunity to do the same. And it turned out that I didn't feel like I suffered from it, frankly. But I just think of all the anguish and how hard that was. And these days, I mean, I'm not a young engineer I don't know how that really feels now, but how do you think that would go over now, and how would people deal with that, you think?
I think when it comes to learning environments, we try to create much more inclusive environment and opportunities. And so as we're designing things, we might do something in person, like a leadership development program in person. But then how else do we do it? Can we do it online so we can be more inclusive? Serving a global audience, a lot of times what we'll do when we have to design things is we will try to do one way in person, because there's nothing like connecting face to face. And because we know that people are coming in from all over the globe, how do we create that similar environment through Zoom, and through those conversations so that people have equal opportunities to continue to grow in their careers?
I think you make a great point that we have technology now much more available, right? I remember back then we did some, because I was at a global company, we did some, video conferences, as we call them, right? And but it was a big deal, right? You had to reserve a room, and it had to be, all kinds of, and usually there was a technical glitch and it didn't work anyway. But these days, yeah, I think the technology helps a lot. And I think, I tell you that conversation left me, for the couple of years it took until the next opportunity came up and I was okay and they offered it to me again. I was really troubled that maybe it had affected my career, and I wonder how much that affected my productivity, at the end of the day, right? I mean, I think today that would have been a very different conversation. There was like a thinly veiled kind of a threat that if I didn't do it, I wouldn't have a good career path. And I think everybody thought of that as, even I thought that was a normal reaction from my supervisor. But today, I don't think people think of that as a normal reaction. So I think things have, and I think that's the struggle, is that people like me who grew up in that era, sometimes I see leaders that, because we had to go through that, you get to a place in your career, now you're managing, a bunch of people, and you want to kind of apply the same kind of rules, or the way you were treated, right, to your people, and that just doesn't work at all, right? I mean, as leaders, the biggest thing is adaptability and being changing, just not just for others, but for ourselves. And so that's one thing that I always try and include this in my, when I get a chance with a little audience here, that, it's really important to look back and say, how much of my own experiences, what I experienced as an employee, is still applicable to my employees now that I'm in a position of power, and do everything we can to understand, uh, you know, the current era and people's expectations. Um, and there's a saying, customer is always right. And I don't want to say that employees are always right, but I think employees' expectations are, we just can't be on the wrong side of, like certain expectations just because we grew up that way or we were treated that way, and now expect those things of employees because, society has changed, and each generation has its own thing. And the Gen Z, some people say, oh, they just don't want to work as hard. I don't think that's true at all. I know a lot of Gen Zers. We have a lot of Gen Zers at our company. And, it's like they're super hard workers. They just have their priorities, I think, are different. And from my view, frankly, I'm just talking about my own generation. When you think of it, there is some choices I wish I had maybe made differently, actually, because at the end of the day, your kids, your family, are extremely important. And most of the time I made it the right way, by the way, as evidenced by I have a really great young man as a son that I'm very proud of. It all turned out good, but along the way, there's a few things I miss, rehearsals and this and that. And things with my son that I wish I had made those decisions differently. So anyway, I digress, but a little bit of sharing there. But now that we've talked about, anything else you want to say about L&D design, just as you think of it or revisiting the design?
No, I just think it's something that we're always learning and changing, based off of our team members and the needs of the organization. I think that that's really the important piece, is that L&D cannot be static. It needs to adjust depending on what our team members look like and what the makeup of the demographics and where they're located, but then also what's our organizational priorities. And so we need to be more agile and be able to adapt quicker than I think we ever have in the past.
I love that message, that L&D is not static, right? I mean, it's like sometimes, like they say in the financial markets, past performance is no indication of future returns, right? I mean, just because a program has worked for you, right? If I think the message, right, if I may, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I get out of that is, if you haven't revisited your L&D program and you're not looking at, is it still effective, for our workforce, for the changing organizational needs, for the changing environment, the technology, all the things that are changing around us, and especially in the last few years, it seems more than ever, then, that's a risk that you should really be at least revisiting it. And maybe you keep a lot of components the same, but it is, I think, a field that's going to look very different in 5 to 10 years. And we'll talk about that. That'll be our last main topic. But this now leads us actually very well into the topic of, well, how do I know if my L&D program is working or not? Let's say I decide that, yes, I should go revisit it. But then how do I know how well it's working or not? I know that there is a model that's very widely used. It's the Kirkpatrick model, right? And so since we have you here as an expert, I'd love to have you speak to it, if you would, and kind of just speak a little bit to, what is this model? How do you, explain it just briefly, just to level set everyone for measuring L&D effectiveness, and any stories you can share of where this model has worked for you or not, and any specific KPIs you would look for each of these stages of the Kirkpatrick model.
So the Kirkpatrick model has been around since the 50s. It was revised in the 70s to add that fourth layer of results by actually Kirkpatrick's son, because they were realizing that behaviors are important, but ultimately in an organization, we want to see results, and also in our personal lives. if we're going to personal development sessions. And so the very first layer level is all about reaction. So this is about that initial response. So you just got out of a training session, and how did it make you feel? What did you react to it? I find this is best if I'm doing multiple trainings on the same topic, that we can adjust and fix quickly. So if something just did not work in that training, or there was an example we gave that was not clear, or an activity that we did, that immediate feedback helps us adjust that learning so we can do better next time. The limitations is it doesn't really tell us what the learner got out of it or be able to apply. Because, something we all know is that just because you've been able to attend and consume information, it does not mean you can actually be competent in that and be able to apply that information. And so that's the limitations of the reaction level. Level 2 is all about the learning. What are we doing? What are we learning on skills and knowledge? It's self-perception on, can I go out and do this Excel spreadsheet now? Do I feel comfortable doing this new skill in my job? If it's a customer service, answering these new questions on a new product. It's good for the immediate, but again, there's a lot of limitations around it. It doesn't assess long-term impact. Are we delivering on those outcomes? Because we can't see that. There are also limitations here if we don't have great defined objectives and outcomes, because we don't know exactly what we're measuring. And so that's where those well-written objectives come in.
And Michelle, is this
yeah,
in your experience, pardon me, but is the level 2 measured again, like right in the moment? Like a lot of these training things have, like a survey at the end that asks both about your reaction, how did you like it and all that, but also may ask you some questions about the content, right? I mean, we talk about this level 2. Is that what we're talking about? It's done typically in the moment and like right after you complete an online thing or right after you come out of a training.
Exactly. It's those questions that you get at the survey of, what did you learn? How can you apply it? And you answer those questions, and you might know what you learned, but there's not that follow-up. Like the follow-up for the behavior and the results comes later. So the reaction and the learning usually comes immediate, like you said. So thank you for bringing that up. Whereas the behavior and the results take time.
Well, and that learning, right, is again back to the forgetting curve, right? Because I may know it like right now because I just did this thing, right? And now, do you ask me, a month later, who knows how much of that I remember?
And I think it's one of the downfalls when you pull people out to do trainings, like especially if it's training for their job that they need the skill. So we put them in a classroom to do that. And then we say, now go back. And the time they walk back to their desk and they get the task needed or that job activity needed to use that skill, they could have forgot half of it. And so it's, how are we designing our learning that they're doing it in the flow of work so that way they can get those resources and then apply it immediately.
Great. Yes, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. And then level 3 and level 4 is really, the epitome of what we try to go to a lot of times in L&D and our leadership development programs. It's kind of where I try to design it, even with our DEI, if we're talking about inclusion and behavior change, this is where we want to go and be able to measure. Behavior is important because it's how we actually interact with each other. It's how we show up. It's applying those skills that we're learning and actually putting it to use. It might not be perfect all the time, but how are you doing it? And then the results is, are we increasing organizational performance? Like by this investment in this training, are we seeing increase in productivity, whether it's increase in revenue or decreased call times or more engaged employees or employees who feel included in the workplace? So it can be quite a few different things, but ultimately that's what we want to be able to see. And it's the hardest to measure because it takes time and it takes effort to continuously go back to measure these things to see if we're seeing that improvement.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great way to describe, and I picked up a couple of tips there that I wasn't aware of before. Thank you. So so let's say we all understand the model, but are there any specific strategies, tools, resources you can share, especially, free ones? Because, we do have smaller organizations sometimes in our audience who don't have that much of a budget, or they have very tiny budgets. But these days there's so much out there, so is there anything you could recommend, any specific things? I mean, we're not doing any selling for anybody here. We understand that. And all the disclaimers apply in terms of people going out and using anything we talk about here. It's really more to make it real, right? Because sometimes, people tell us all the time that they love our webinars just because we talk about stuff they can go out and do right away, beyond just, concepts and ideas. So is there any tools or anything that our audience can use for implementing and improving the effectiveness of their L&D programs, given, within the context of this model that you just described?
A lot of it can be done through surveys, using any sort of surveying platform that you have in your organization, from SurveyMonkey to Google Forms, to be able to ask and gather that information, and then using that data to understand where you're at. I think another really important piece that's free is using our supervisors, so our people leaders, to really assess what we're doing and if they're seeing the impact. And so, can you do small focus groups? Can you have conversations with direct supervisors that are involved? An example of that would be we have a mid-level supervisor program that we're cohorting right now. It's a pilot. We have about 14 people involved in it. One of the things we're doing is their supervisors are informed on what they're learning and what we're doing each week. So that way they can follow up on it too. And so then not only are we following up with them, their supervisors are, and then we can go to their supervisor and say, are you seeing these skills developed after 6 months? Are you seeing improvement in this, in their coaching skills? So that way there's multiple ways we can get that information, both quantitative and qualitative data.
And how do they relay that back to you? I mean, how do you get that information back from the supervisors?
I'll send we'll do a lot of surveying, and then also one-on-one conversations.
Got it. Yeah, talking about tools, I can also maybe let everybody know, we have a very cool AI tool. Just again, we don't do this often, but because it's relevant here, it creates to the point of surveys, right? A lot of people have been telling us, our customers, that they don't have time to come up with good questions, beyond just what's usually offered within the training module or whatever they have, but beyond that, to create other surveys. And so we have this very cool AI tool that creates bite-sized trivia on any content, like your training material, handbooks, policies, benefits, anything, all under a minute. And it's actually, I can show a little slide here. It's actually, it creates trivia that is always under a minute, which is another thing. It's the attention span that, you can get people's attention to, even, after they go to a training and they're done, they're at their desk, they have a lot of things to do. But here, you can just feed it whatever training materials there was, and you can have it created with AI, a survey for you every week if you wanted for the next, it's proven that in the first 30 days, it's really beneficial if you actually survey people. And so there is a free version of it. The reason I bring it up here is that there is a free version, and you can go to this link here, gotrivi.com/get-demo, and we'll get with you and we'll get you signed up for the basic plan that's free. It's just this kind of things that are out there. I mean, this is a new concept, of course, to create it with AI, but these days I find that there's just no, I don't want to say excuse, but no reason really to not measure the effectiveness of the L&D, because frankly, a lot of money is spent, as we just saw. A lot of it goes out the door and you forget. So you must measure it to see, like in this case, what we have is not just measuring what people know, but because it gives you feedback by question, you can know which areas they're really missing more. How long it's taking them to respond, even within that 1 minute, right? the average scores. You can be, have some rewards in there to engage them some more. So there's many different ways of both engaging them, getting some feedback on what people know, but also improving your L&D program, because you get better insight into what they really know or don't know in a very objective way. So again, that's just another thing to share here. We always try and share real tools and things that people can use. So now let's shift a little bit to the last major topic, which is the emerging trends and what we should expect as we look 2 to 5 years down the road. Can you look into a crystal ball and share what you see in terms of emerging trends and future of L&D? I think I've seen and heard of a lot of new approaches, some of which make me a little bit, like some virtual reality stuff and immersive environments and things like that. How do you think about, those kind of capabilities, or just broader terms and trends, not just technology related necessarily, but just broader, kind of trends in the way that the future of L&D is going?
So many fun things coming out there. I think that's really exciting about L&D. If we're willing to take a risk, right, and jump in and try something and fail and maybe fail forward. One of the things we always have to think about, I think, and this is one of the things I love about what you brought up about free resources, a lot of that stuff is really expensive to try, but there's so many cheap things and free things we can use as well. So one of the things I've been playing quite a bit in and trying to learn more about, is with adaptive AI. How can we use it in L&D to become more efficient, more productive, and helpful, in our work that we're doing? And there's also a lot of risks, right? As we use ChatGPT, it's open source right now, if you just use the regular website. Or there's also now starting, I think it was last fall it came out, was ChatGPT for teams or for the enterprise organization, where they keep the data you put into there confidential. So that really opens up how you use it completely different. So a use for it that it's been really interesting if you use it for the enterprise piece is around your surveying. A lot of L&D people are not data analytic people. That's not why we got into this business. And so we need to be able to analyze the data we're getting and be able to tell a story from it that matters to our leadership. And so how do we use AI to help us with some of that? And so, one of the frameworks I think that is helpful as I think about AI is, I heard this from a different place, but how do we analyze AI in a task framework, right? And use it for really helping us. It's never going to replace everything we do in L&D, but looking at it, where can AI come in and do something for us? Can it be a thought partner? Can it be something to gather some information so we can get some research and information from somewhere? Or can it be something that we collaborate on, gives us a first draft that we can then go in and do what we need to, if it's just drafting an email? Or analyzing data. If you have that safe place to put it in, can you put it in there and be like, what are the themes that you're finding from this data? Because you can go back and forth with it and say, well, here's something I saw. What do you think? And it'll come back to you. But then you need to know where you, as a human and as an L&D professional, add your value, right? It's in the storytelling. It's in the presentations to our C-suites. But how do we use this data that's out there? I think is really going to be, in this technology, fascinating for L&D. But there's always going to be those risks too of data security and privacy, and how do we use it well?
Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, you just started by saying, HR professionals are, overworked, right? Have a lot to do, and are trained in a way that, to date at least, right? I mean, the digital and transformation and just data analytics and things like that haven't been a big part of it. It's becoming more and more a part of it now in the programs, that people go through. But given that, I mean, there's definitely a digital first kind of a trend, right, in everything we do, right? We can't even in our daily, I mean, when your phone is just misplaced or your phone is for a moment, out of battery or something, I mean, we just don't know what to do with ourselves, right? Because like I can't find where I'm going because I always use it. I can't communicate with anyone because I don't remember anybody's phone numbers anymore off the top of my head. So when I talk about digital first, I'm talking about just nuts and bolts, just running our lives every day. And almost everyone has to do that unless you're sitting on top of a mountain in a cave. But so when you have that, I guess for a moment, I want to speak to, it just occurred to me, right? It's, L&D professionals are always training, thinking about training the workforce, right? But what about themselves? How do L&D professionals get trained for a digital first, data analytics driven world? I mean, any resources, any comments about that and how you and your team maybe go about keeping yourself up to date? I mean, you seem to be very up to date, but but I mean, how do you do that? How do you stay up to date?
I'm a member of the Association of Talent Development, and I'm certified through them. And so I think that helps because the resources and the access and the networking that I get. But it does cost money, so this is not an advertisement, but I found it valuable for me in my personal journey. Also podcasts. I do a lot of podcasts and reading from
Love
different thought
podcast.
leaders. It's a great way to spend my commute. I know that when I'm listening to a podcast that I'm not going to get all of it, but I'll get enough that I'll have some fun questions to come in or think about for that day or to incorporate into my work. I think that's always the challenge I have to myself is, I consume a lot of information. And so when I'm listening to a podcast, like, what's the one thing? What's the one thing that I'm going to ask today or incorporate into my work day to day to try to apply it because of that forgetting curve. If I don't do that, it's so easy not to apply it, and then you forget. So I think there's multiple ways. And I think it's also, there's got to be, there's local networks we can get involved in, and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great tool to connect with like-minded L&D leaders to really share. I think L&D as a sector, we're pretty open on sharing what's worked and what didn't work for us.
I love that. I mean, I think more than ever, it's important to connect with others, especially as fast as things are moving. It's really hard, even when you go to a course or something, usually the course, because it takes some amount of time to put the content together and everything. As far as technology goes, a lot of times it's outdated by the time you go and take, right? Just by the nature of how it's prepared. But podcasts are much more in the moment. They try and their format allows that. I also love, I just love books that I, just audiobooks, right? I use, Audible, but there's various ways of doing that. And just recently I was talking to someone, an HR professional, and they were, we're actually talking like on email, we're exchanging back and forth. And for some reason she said something about, I'm reading this book, Make It Stick. So I just immediately, I mean, I don't know if you've read, I hadn't read it, and it's by Peter Brown. And apparently it's very good in terms of the L&D strategies and so on. And just immediately, as soon as I saw her email, just right then and there, I got it on my, on my phone. I added it to my library, downloaded it to listen to it. I just like you, I can't drive or even make dinner or do anything without listening to either a podcast or something on, an audiobook. It just makes whatever task we're doing that's usually we regard as a little bit of a waste of time, go faster actually for me. Anyway, some people really enjoy cooking and stuff. I'm not one of them, but but it's okay. Just sharing here, probably at TMI. But it's some people enjoy that. Of course, they want to have quiet, and that's great too, by the way. I'm not saying everybody should be crazy like me, but it is, when you go for a walk, I mean, different situations, there's just so much that can be absorbed through these ways. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Another thing I have really, learned about these days, and more with the technology and everything else, it's more possible, is the idea of personalized learning, which you touched upon a little bit earlier. So, it sounds like a really hard thing to do, to personalize learning. um, when, especially if you have larger organizations, even if you have budget, and for smaller organizations, just because usually there's not that much budget. So how do you go about that? Can you say more about some, kind of practical ways to personalize learning to some extent? We talked about it at the top of this webinar a little bit too, but just some practical ways to go about personalizing learning without a lot of resources, maybe, or even if you have a lot of resources, but you're a very large organization, you have many different types of people.
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge. In our organization, we have 3,500 staff members, 18 different countries, 7 different languages. And so we're constantly trying to figure out what level and pattern and how do we make it accessible. And I also know how I learn is going to look completely different than how you learn. And so how do we make it accessible and personalized? It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing lesson too, and like listening. So we offer, classes through our LMS that we either design or we've purchased that people can self-select into. We're trying to get better in our marketing around it, so that way we can help actually push learning as well on certain topics if it's an organizational skill-based need. And also realizing good is better than perfect. And so trying to just get some things out the door without waiting until it's 100%. So with personalized learning, what I mean by that is, here's some content curated on this topic. Is it the best? I don't know. But if we're wanting to learn that people can self-select into, and that, we're focusing on in the organization that you can choose, get some things out there that people can select into, so it makes the curation easier for them. So having more options is better than waiting till something is just right. And I think that's where I get my own way a lot, is waiting, because I want to get the best learning out there that people can self-select into, or the best learning path that they can take if they want to grow or progress in this area and self-select in. And then they end up being hurt because of that. And so how do we create environments and different modalities? So like that personalized learning of, if you learn by audibles, or maybe you prefer to read a book or watch a quick video. Like, how do we create those different avenues to learn the same topics for that personalized learning? And tapping into different areas that's free on, TED Talks or YouTube videos, that we don't have to create everything.
Yes, I hear you speak to couple important things, right? One is more flexibility and more options to select from, that people can just self-select, as you say, and kind of guide their own learning, but all maybe related to the same topic, but just maybe different levels, different types of focus areas, and then the delivery, right? I mean, I think just as we talk about technology, it's always very present in my mind that I think there's a real dimension of diversity, which is, age, right? And there's some older workers sometimes that feel left out of the digital, this digital divide, right? And so offering, at the same time, being very cognizant that technology isn't the solution for everyone. And then sometimes it's just the nature of the environment. We have some customers that, for example, are in a manufacturing environment, and they don't have any, those people on the floor don't have any, any devices assigned to them. They prefer not to use personal devices. So then what do you do there, right? We have some solutions, of course, for that we provide. But once you get into this area of L&D, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we've always talked about, just being more inclusive programs, become critical. I mean, they always are critical, but in this case, it becomes very visibly critical, because some people just can't access it and just feel completely left out of that. So how do you deal with that? I think that's a very important area of personalization also. Any other trends that you see? I have a couple more that I'm going to bring up here in a moment, but I want to
I think
let you.
Another one that I'm hearing a lot around is, skills-based organizations, skills-based hiring, skills-based development. And it's an interesting one because, we used to talk a lot about competencies and we did a lot of competency models. And so now we're talking skills. And so
Mm.
as I'm getting my mind wrapped around some of this stuff and what I'm learning, how do we not fall into some of those same traps, again, of over designing but under implementing? I think that happened a lot with competency-based models. And also, how do we decide what those skills are? There's so many different things that we can design to, but it doesn't always apply well. And so when we do like a skills assessment, somebody might say they're great. A new employee might come in and say they're great at presentations, but they need to learn our content or they need to learn our sales products or anything else. And so how do we make that apply across the board and understanding that you might have the basic skills, but there's still knowledge to learn. So I think there's going to be a lot around skills coming up, skills-based organizations, like we used to hear a lot about learning organizations. But then how do we do that well and not just talk about it?
You bring up a really great point because today, even universities, right, colleges and universities are having this challenge, right, where, I mean, the learning model was pretty clear after high school. If you wanted to progress and, you would go to college or university, they teach you everything you'd want to know about that topic. And then before you leave, in the last semester or two, you're having job offers, it was simple, right? To some extent. I'm sure my parents or grandparents would disagree that it was simple because at that time, I'm sure there was other challenges that I'm overlooking right now. But relative to today, right? You look at it and people are actually don't see the relevance sometimes for some areas. For example, in technology, in information systems and technology, a lot of people are opting for these, much shorter 3-month or 6-month programs or just the online content. So much of it always astounds me how much of what great universities, very selective universities like Harvard and Stanford and others have available online that any of us can just log into and start, and these, this massive formats for, delivering content that people take advantage of for at a much lower price point. So I think, when we think of L&D, it just strikes me that in the workplace, L&D professionals can look to even maybe how especially the incoming workforce is coming through a different experience than, again, we're used to for decades, right, of coming through a very structured, college experience. I remember I had a young engineer when I first went to a very big organization. But he was at a level that after I started interacting with him, I was surprised that he was not actually promoted to a much higher level of seniority, because we'd be in meetings, decision-making meetings about, I was in aerospace and defense, so we were making, decisions about pretty critical products and complex products in that space. And he always had great ideas and great leadership skills and everything. So one day I asked someone who was his direct supervisor who reported to me, and I asked, how come, Bill is not advanced more? And he said, well, I have to share with you, he didn't finish his degree. Actually, he's not degreed, you know. And at that time, again, this is, 10 or more years ago, that was like a big deal, right? And it was like, there's requirements for this and we cannot. And I was just shocked. And I actually did everything in my power, but it was hard. It took me at a senior executive level to push for getting him a promotion to the level where he could manage other people and where he could be. And we had to just do a bunch of waivers and get him to promise that he'd go back to school and get his degree meanwhile. And we paid for it and, all that good stuff. But it astounds me that now maybe that's an outdated model, right? I mean, why make people do those things, especially when technology is advancing at such a pace that what they're teaching you in school in certain areas anyway may not even be that relevant. So I think when you look at that, it kind of puts L&D in a different context, does it? I mean, it just came to me in real time here.
Completely. And I think it's one of the things we talk about in our organization is when we're doing job descriptions. Is that really required or is that a preference? And telling you why, because we want to influence and have learning at all levels. not just for people who can access a degree.
Mm.
And so somebody
Yeah.
might have 20 years of experience and be an amazing people leader. Let's do that. Versus somebody who has all the degrees and might not be so great. So how do we promote that person and technical expertise? You know, we were just having this conversation in my organization with my leader yesterday. But how do you do both? You know, how do we honor the people who are amazing thought leaders, but then also how do you honor the people leaders who might have education or might not?
Yeah, there's that. I guess it goes back to this familiarity bias, right? We're familiar with certain models of,
Yeah.
that are frankly tried and true, right? That people that go through that structure program and stuff, often will perform at certain expected levels and so on. So it makes it a little bit more difficult, but just because it's more difficult and challenging doesn't mean that it's not the right thing. And in fact, a critical thing for us to be mindful of, because more and more we could miss out on a lot of great talent. And we have to just come up with other ways of assessing that. Another trend that I see more and more are these micro learnings, bite-sized content, right? Just like a minute or two. We have some training modules, and they're different lengths, and the ones that are the 1 to 3 minute ones are the most popular actually, and people rave about them. Is that something you see in general? Is that a broader kind of a trend as well, or and maybe it's just my porthole here?
No, I think it's one of those that's very important. I think, especially if it's training and developing training for in the flow of work, I think it also helps designing and using a micro learning for different learning styles. That way we can, adapt our learning. Some people want to go into the in-depth 10-minute video, and some people just want the 30-second overview. And so what are people's attention spans? What are people's needs? And learning styles. I think that's a great way to take it into account.
Yeah, and I would say that it's the attention span has just gotten so much shorter. And if you're not able to deliver some important things, in a short period of time, then maybe we just haven't understood the essence of something, what people really need to know that well either. And we should work on that, right? And also for this reinforcement, right? Even if you do a training that can't be done in under 20-minute, recorded training, or an hour-long, training session or something, you absolutely, I think, need the micro learnings in between to reinforce, and then, some kind of also assessment, testing or something like the trivia that I mentioned, to understand whether they are, they've understood it or not. And, you've offered great content. Let me just say there's a couple of questions that I see already. What's the risk for organizations if they don't adapt to be more agile, regarding learning? What's the risk in your mind?
There's a few. I think one, we're not going to deliver on organizations' needs. As a strategic partner and where L&D needs to sit, we need to help our organizations deliver on their strategy. And if we're not agile and able to adapt based off of what our leaders are seeing the needs are, I think we're going to be missing some of those goals, whether it be revenue or performance or impact in communities where we serve. I think those are going to be some big issues. And so we need to be able to listen and apply and not just go with what we thought we knew, because we need to continuously also model how do we learn in the flow of work. I think that's a really important piece for L&D in our role.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up one other question here, but let me also share the recertification credits here for those who are, I noticed this conversation was so engaging, I kind of lost track of time, but we have about a minute left. And in this minute, maybe Michelle, you could answer this question. How can organizations ensure that learning and development opportunities are accessible to employees from diverse backgrounds, including those with disabilities or different learning styles?
There's a lot of different resources, including free resources as you're designing. I think some of it is using those resources. So if we're designing something that's going to be online or a reader, we want to make sure it's accessible. Those might be visibly impaired. So how do you caption your photos or anything you have in there? But also, are your colors good? And so there's free websites out there that'll help analyze the colors you're using to make sure that they are accessible for anybody with visibility issues. So I think that's one way. Is it adding on closed captions? Is it translating our materials? So there's a lot of different things we can do, but I think it all is rooted and we have to know our employee base. Once we know what our employee base is, and if it's been disclosed, because it's not going to be something we can ask, then we can design better as well. So partnering really with HR to understand, what are the needs of the organization.
Thank you so much. We're at the top of the hour, Michelle. I can't thank you enough. Again, Michelle Chassie, please connect with us for the audience if you have any other questions. I want to thank you a lot for everything you've shared. I want to mention that this webinar is also closed caption capability, and I see that some of our audience are actually using it. It's super important to just ask what people need. I mean, the thing I want to leave everyone is what you just ended on is we can't ask about disabilities, we can't ask about certain things, but we can ask, what do you need, right? So that we can service our customers better, our employees better, and make sure that they have what they need to learn and to grow and to thrive. Thanks again. You've been an amazing panelist here with us and have given us a lot to think about, Michelle. And thank you to the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.